Welcome to the AM Update, Week in Review. A collection of the best moments from Aaron McIntyre's Morning Update.
And now here's this. The All In podcast is hosted by a number of business leaders in this country, and they have a right-wing bent for sure, but they interview people from across the political spectrum. Well, one of the hosts of that podcast is Chamath Palihapitiya. He has been very, very positive about what Trump is trying to accomplish with reorganizing global trade and reshoring American manufacturing and critical infrastructure. He was accused of indicating that the White House, the Trump White House, makes backroom crony deals with business leaders. He was accused by New York Times' Ezra Klein, who joined the All In podcast. Now, this clip is not so much about clarifying what Chamath said, so much as it is spelling out the differences between this Trump administration, what they're actually like dealing with, as opposed to the Obama and Biden administrations. Listen to this.
Before I came on the show,
This is the voice of Ezra Klein, by the way, the New York Times columnist.
Where you're saying that one of the problems with the Biden administration was that you couldn't get anybody on the phone. And in the Trump administration, you make the call, the deputy chief of staff picks up, you say, hey, I need you to talk to this company. I work with them. They're freaking out about the tariffs. The deputy chief of staff calls the company. They work something out.
No, not that they work something out. They listen.
This world in which we are doing the deal making by individual relationships, by who can get their calls answered, not by rules that feel clear and stable.
That's how the Biden administration worked,
listen to that
Ezra.
clip. That's not what Chamath said.
And that's not what I said.
Well, Chamath,
Ezra, you're trying to make it sound like corruption.
Hold on.
Ezra and Biden, it was George Clooney that was making the call. Who cares what George Clooney thinks?
Didn't you just say on, I was very, very critical of Biden running again.
I saw that clip, Ezra, and what Chamath said, what Chamath said is simply that the White House listens when he calls, whereas he couldn't get his calls returned by the Obama administration.
Great. I think we're actually not saying something all that different here.
You made it sound like corruption.
I actually do think what Trump is working through is deal by deal patronage based on how he sees the company. The other country.
That's not what happened. Ezra, can I just make sure that this is clear to you? This is a 150-year-old American business. I have no interest in that company except a friendship. These are Americans hiring Americans trying to compete with China who were very negatively affected. And all I said was, why don't you have a chance to explain what's happening on the ground? My point that I was trying to make, and maybe I didn't make it clear enough, so let me set the record straight. The Trump administration, what I have seen as a businessman, is willing to hear the conditions on the ground. As a businessman, when I was building, Ezra, just to be clear, critical rare earth supplies for America under the Biden administration, battery can materials to compete with China under the Biden administration, AI chips to be the best inference solution under the Biden administration, I couldn't get a call back. That's just the facts. Not because I wanted anything, just to tell them what was going on.
So fair enough.
That is insane.
Okay, fair enough. I am not telling you that the Biden administration should have returned your calls. What I am saying is that the degree to which Trump first, and then everybody around him as an example of him, because culture comes from the top, is working off this kind of individual call and deal making worries me, because I believe that you had every one of these calls you're saying, and they went exactly the way you say they went. And then the calls that you are not getting, and they
2 minutes ago, Ezra, you were saying that a 10% across the board tariff was too broad, and we need to go industry by industry. And now you're saying that it's going to be too particular and he shouldn't do country by country negotiations.
Using the word deal making,
so
listening to people. Listening to people is not deal making, Ezra. It's just listening to people.
Are you really going to be here and tell me that the way Trump himself works is not individual deal making with countries, with people, with Eric Adams? Is this really the argument here?
I will tell you what I've seen, and David's seen much more. What I have seen from the president is he takes in hundreds of opinions and starts to figure out what the ground truth is. And the reason is when you only listen to one or two, every president probably deals with this, you have this information asymmetry problem because you are the president of the United States. And so how do you cut through it? You talk to hundreds and hundreds of people and you triangulate what the truth is. So it's not like he's giving any favor. He's collecting information. That is a good process. You want the most powerful person in the world to get to the ground truth.
So that is a clip from the All In podcast featuring Chamath, I'm not going to try to say his last name again, David Sachs, and that New York Times columnist, Ezra Klein. What you just heard described there from Chamath is actually a wonderful example of leadership from the White House. They understand how serious what they are trying to accomplish actually is, and they're just trying to listen to as many people as possible to try to figure out what the truth is. Wisdom in a multitude of counsel. Yet this New York Times columnist, of course, sees this in the most cynical of light, just assuming that because the Trump administration is listening to hundreds of business leaders, that they are cutting cronyistic backroom deals. That's not what's happening at all. So, lest you think that there's no plan, that they're just doing this slipshod, there's one business leader right there, Chamath, who says, no, the White House is actually being very prudent and very careful in the way that they are crafting policy and making sure they're actually understanding on the ground how this is affecting businesses. So that's good news.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at Real AM Update.
And now here's this. This is comedian Theo Von on tariffs. And before you say, oh, come on. What he says is basically, I think, a lot of people's intuition here with what President Trump is trying to do with these tariffs and why he's trying to do them. Listen to this.
Oh, these tariffs are getting out of control.
Oh, yeah. The tariffs are getting out of control. All the everyday items that will cost Americans more following Donald Trump's global tariffs. But here's the thing with tariffs is the goal of tariffs is that if it costs more for people to bring their products in, then they'll build them here.
Yes,
right?
That's part of it, yeah.
So it's kind of a long-term play. It's going to take a while.
It's going to be bumpy for a while,
right.
But that's if it works.
Right.
So we'll see, but it might take 10 years.
Right. If we don't try this, though, then I think it's a wrap.
Oh, you think just go for it, bite the belt and go for it? I do, because I think at this point, even from my own perception, we'd probably on this tour, this comedy tour, we've been to probably the top 200 cities, like size-wise in America, maybe even more than that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them, there's nothing there. Yes.
It's empty downtowns.
Oh, yeah. It's set, boarded up. Everything.
We're in Amarillo. It's empty downtown. Shreveport, Louisiana, it was empty downtown. Toledo, Ohio, right? It's getting a little bit better there. And that's just a few. I mean, a lot of places, Montgomery, just empty.
What you just heard there from comedian Theo Von, I think is a sentiment, at least on the right, that is shared by a lot of people. And maybe it even goes beyond just political dividing lines. Basically, this play that President Trump is trying to do, isolating China and trying to get at least better trade deals and better access to markets abroad, this is a last attempt at trying to use American leverage on the global scene economically while we still have that leverage. Because if it can't be done this way, it can't be done anyway. It just can't be done. And here's my first observation. I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of listening over the past couple of weeks on matters of economics, trade, currency. They're all interconnected. And I've barely scratched the surface, trying to be as informed as possible and reading a variety of perspectives, both pro and con, what President Trump is attempting to do here. Trying to read a lot of perspectives, wisdom in a multitude of counsel. Here is the number one thing that I keep coming back to. For those who are, let's just, good faith, coming to this debate as free traders. And so tariffs are anathema to them, because that's anathema to free trade. It should be anyway. Here is what I keep coming back to. I cannot find anyone, any classical economist, any free trade theory absolutist. I cannot find any retort. How does free trade, how does classical economics deal with a problem like China? Because China has been doing business for the last 20 years, certainly, but last 40 to 50 years, under the auspices of being a free and open trading partner, while they have been doing anything but. They have taken advantage of a largely free trade system around the globe. They've used trade to increase their hegemony and dominance. And the big bet I believe that China has made for decades now, the big bet that they have made repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly, is that you Western leaders, especially you, looking at you, United States, you will never call us on our crap. You'll never truly hold us to account, because we don't believe that your citizens can withstand short-term pain because of your 2, 4, 6-year political cycles. That's the big bet that China has made. And now President Trump is calling them on that. A couple of other big picture observations. I've noticed that when it comes to currency, when it comes to trade, economics, usually the things that you think would be the most simple are a lot more complicated. And the things that are very complicated are a lot more simple than you think. For example, you've heard a slogan. It's not really a slogan. I'll get to that in a little bit. You've heard a slogan, I think, that Trump has said multiple times. And he said variations of this, but basically, if you don't have manufacturing, you don't have a country. Now, that sounds simple, but it's really more complicated than that. There is actually underpinning there. You don't have a country if you don't have manufacturing. Number one, I think the first thing is, if you're not actually manufacturing at least a good chunk of your own goods, or for your own consumption or your own export, you're going to naturally have these incredible trade deficits and trade imbalances. So that's one thing. The second thing is, it is truly a national security issue. Now, Trump he has said it is a national security issue, but he hasn't gone into more specifics and details. When you have factories are convertible. And we saw this during World War II. Factories are convertible into a war machine. It's a lot easier to turn a factory into something that can produce war effort supplies than it is an office. It's a lot easier to do that. So that's something that sounds simple, a slogan, but is a lot more complicated. Finally, the biggest thing, going back to my first point, the biggest thing that I think I've learned. Because classical economic theory and free trade theory have had absolutely no answers for the China problem, a country that masquerades as an international trading partner but is really just using trade as a means to gain hegemony and dominance on the world stage. How does free trade account for that? It doesn't. I haven't heard anybody attempt to actually address that concern. Because of that, I would like to actually hear your plan for addressing China. Everybody who is picking apart and nitpicking every single detail of how Trump is doing this, what Trump is doing. You have all the Free Trade, American Enterprise Institute. You have all of these think tanks that are just poking holes in every step of the way. What's your frickin' plan for dealing with China? The one thing that they never want to touch, they always want to focus on the tariffs. They always want to focus on the bluster. They always want to focus on the chaos. But how do you deal with China? How do you stop a country like this, who much of the world, including us, are so beholden to? How do you stop them from stealing your intellectual property? How do you stop them from ripping off, from devaluing their currency every time competition starts to get a little stiff? How do you do that? What is your plan for addressing this? It's like the D.L. Moody line. I like my way of doing things better than your way of not doing anything. One way or another, we're going to find answers here if Trump follows through all the way to the end with this. We're going to find out how much leverage America actually has, how little or how much leverage China actually has, and how many people on the world stage, I'm looking at you, Canada and Europe, really just have Trump derangement syndrome and would rather get in bed, if they're not already, with the Chinese Communist Party just to stick it to President Trump. And I can guarantee you, if there are people, leaders in the free world who fit into that category, you deserve every bit of scorn and every bit of consequence for that action. Because I promise you, we are a lot better friends to you than the CCP will be. Some more maybe good news. What is a white pill? Well, a red pill is the pill you take to escape the matrix. The blue pill is the pill you take to stay comfortably numb within the matrix. A white pill is just a pill you take to understand reality when reality is actually good and there are good trends. I found this follow, and he's a wonderful follow so far on X. It's at Says Simulation, but he goes by the name Labrador Skeptic. The Last Hope of the West and the Fertility White Pill. I want to read this thread. It's a couple of years old, actually. A couple of years old. But I think it's fascinating nonetheless. Some good news, a white pill for your Monday morning. Here's the thread. Quote, as fertility declines in the U.S. and Europe, it is only the conservative heartland culture that wants to preserve Western civilization and is also reproducing in sufficient numbers to do so. There's nothing subtle about this map of white fertility rates. The Democratic strongholds are dark green, with far below replacement fertility. All of the high birth rate areas are Republican states in the Midwest, Plains, South, and Intermountain West. It gets better. A number of studies have shown that conservative fertility rates are much higher than liberal fertility rates. So each state really has two different fertility rates, a higher one for conservatives and a lower one for liberals. Now, Labrador Skeptic has attached various maps that illustrate what he's talking about in this thread with data backed from the federal government. Moving on, it gets much better. A number of studies have shown that conservative fertility rates are much higher than liberal fertility rates. So each state really has two different fertility rates, a higher one for conservatives and a lower one for liberals. A 2020 national exit poll by CNN showed that parents with children 18 and under, the younger fertile group, 62% voted Republican, while only 37% voted Democratic. Those parents were 68% more likely to vote red than blue. The total fertility for whites was estimated by the CDC to be 1.67. So a little algebra shows us that the red fertility is about 2.03 children per woman, and the blue fertility rate pre-pandemic is about 1.21 children per woman. Nationally, Republicans are almost at replacement levels. Democrats are far below. Importantly, red fertility rates vary greatly. The more rural, conservative, and religious the person and county, the culture, the higher the fertility rate. These cultural differences lead to differences between Republicans. Coastal urban Republicans are not, on average, as religious, rural, or conservative, and the birth rates confirm that. Heartland Republicans are the ones with culture that reproduces. Heartland he defines as the South and the Midwest, the Rust Belt. Adjusting the map for Republican percentages, Republicans are not at replacement level in dark or medium green states, the liberal states. The light greens are around 2, and the medium blue and dark blue are above replacement level. Those on this map would be North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho, Utah, approaching replacement or above replacement levels, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and so on. This information is confirmed by the study shown in the following graph. This is a graph from the Center for Family Studies. Liberal and conservative fertility used to almost be identical. They began to diverge in the 90s as the Democrats moved hard left, even while church attendance was falling rapidly. When we compare the double lines for children, for total children, for women still in their childbearing years, we can see a major change. Younger conservative women moved from a 0.25 to a 0.5 advantage, to nearly a 1 child per woman increase over younger liberal women by 2018. In the Heartland states in particular, there's a strong diverging culture that is likely invisible to coastal urbanites. Liberals are in the second generation in not being all that into children and of prioritizing careers. Political polls show that Heartland youth have not moved hard left like their coastal peers, and by their most personal decisions, young Heartland women are showing that they are in a culture that is increasingly diverging from the blue urban cities. This gap has likely widened quite a bit over the last 5 years, particularly with the pandemic. The Democrat women closed it all down, masked and avoided contact, and went into a paranoia rampage that some are still on. Add in the childbearing losses to higher rates of abortion and gender sexual confusion. I'm guessing fertility is below 1 per woman, the equivalent of the worst European or Asian nations. That would be the liberal women. In the Heartland, however, we're seeing a second-generation divergence where children raised in families that loved their country, loved children, and value the family are having their own children, and they are doing that at about 2 times the rate. In spite of the media and these crazy times, tens of millions of conservative Heartland women are casting the ultimate votes and are devoting their lives to responsibility, giving, and love instead of wokeness, self-indulgence, and narcissism. The Heartland's culture is unique. It is the only large group of people, 100 plus million, of European descent who are not in rapid demographic decline. While of the West, this culture is also distinctly non-European. It's uniquely American. The impact of the heartland culture can also be seen with minority fertility. It turns out that black women don't have children at replacement levels in the big blue states, but they love to have them in the heartland. Hispanic women also do not reproduce at replacement rates on the coast or in the toxic big urban areas, but they love to have kids in the healthier heartland culture, particularly in the Louisiana to Kentucky area, as well as the plains. As it turns out, whether white, black, or Latino, liberal people living in overcrowded, expensive, and crime-ridden big cities tend to not have children, and conservative religious people living in safer, lower-cost, less crowded areas do. When the true picture is seen, then the widespread myth can also be seen. White America is showing as being irreversibly in decline, demographically doomed, but that's simply not true. Liberal whites are indeed in a death spiral. Conservative white America is doing just fine, the best in the West. We are also told an even bigger lie. Whites are doomed by demographics to be a minority in the U.S. This is nonsense. At about 2.03 fertility rate, conservative whites are reproducing faster than blacks as a whole, 1.82 children per woman, and are about equal to Hispanics as a whole, 2.06 per woman. True demographic destiny, if current fertility rates hold, is that heartland culture becomes dominant. Hispanics reproduce at an equal rate but do not overtake. Liberal whites disappear and the black population slowly shrinks. The only way to prevent this is for the Democrats to cheat, which they are doing in every possible way. Immigration is the ultimate cheat, and this is why the borders are open and millions are flooding in. Keep in mind, of course, this was written 2 years ago. Since white conservative children are almost 70% more numerous than liberal children, and likely to be 100% more common soon, the Democrat teachers are trying to capture our kids' minds and poison our children against us. The hard-left Democrats are in a demographic death spiral, but being the controlling and vicious people they are, they're trying to destroy the white conservative culture before they go, and while they still have the numbers to do so. Part of this attempted destruction is the attempt to control the flow of information and convince the heartland culture that we have no hope, even while continuously insulting us as hicks, rednecks, etc., and part of the right is helping with this. We are strong, we are winning, we just have to keep the faith. Seal the borders and take back our schools. None of those are impossible, so long as our leaders come from within our heartland culture. That is a mega thread from an account named Labrador Skeptic, written about 2 years ago. I think it's incredibly fascinating. It is a white pill. And I've always wondered, when you take somebody like George Soros, why do you underwrite the destruction of cities by supporting corrupt and just totally law agnostic district attorneys? What are you hoping to accomplish by unleashing hell on earth in the cities? The same questions I've had about immigration. This is obviously a huge problem. You've got backups of millions and millions of people who do not share our country at the southern border. This doesn't really do. I understand the argument, you bring them here to vote. We heard that earlier in today's program with Stephen Miller. Of course you do that. But why the urgency? Why so many of them? Well, I think that thread actually spells it out perfectly. If demographic trends hold, then your enemies will outnumber you within a generation. Speaking, of course, from a Democrat left-wing perspective. That is existential. And that's why they lie. That's why they cheat. That's why they try to bring in hordes of illegal aliens to overwhelm the people who love this country the most and want to hold on to this country and pass it on to their children. That's the true reason why they do it. They don't do it out of a position of strength, but of weakness. Open borders policy is not a position of strength. It's a position of lashing out from weakness because you see the writing on the wall.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram @RealAMUpdate.
And finally, it's time for our poll of the week. I asked you, who is the real practical leader of the Democrat Party? And I said no meta answers, no tongue-in-cheek answers, as witty, clever, and true as they may be. No answers like Moloch, Satan, nothing like that. I want to know, in practical terms, who you think the leader of the Democrat Party is, because I think it's instructive as to whether actually there is a leader, and if there is one, Are they actually following his or her direction? Here are the options I gave you. Who are the practical leaders or leader of the Democrat Party? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jasmine Crockett, Bernie Sanders, or other? Comment below. We'll get to those in just a little bit. Here's the order of finish. The fewest to the last place is Jasmine Crockett, only 9.9%. Bernie Sanders is next in third place at 10.6%. In second place, other at 32.7%, and 46.9% say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Something I'm learning, I think, about X polls is that a lot of people just click on the first option, no matter what the poll is. And I'm guilty of that too sometimes. Here's what you had to say. Redacted says it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, not remotely settled. Bernie's been an outsider for decades, although well-known. Crockett is getting plenty of attention for now. I still think someone like a Stephen A. Smith could take the lead for the non-extremists. Caravan says they're still trying to figure it out. I don't think there is one currently. Kyle says you're taking all the fun out of it. Otherwise, I would say Lucifer. I said no meta answers, even though Lucifer is probably the correct answer. Blake says Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Morgans. Real question is who's writing the script. Liberty Linda says George Soros and Son are the real leaders. Justin says AOC, Crockett, and to some degree Sanders are in the current mouthpiece position. Auburn Tiger also says George Soros. Mickey says no answer. I was thinking about this today. I got nothing. So Mickey says no answer. There's no leader right now. Bob says I think maybe J.B. Pritzker. That's interesting. Because he does seem like he wants to run, but he's not out there doing the speaking circuit that I'm aware of at the moment. That's an interesting observation. J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. Michael says they don't have one. Pat says there isn't one. Rob says they look rudderless, but it's still George Soros. Bo says the jury's still out. Andy says, I think the Obamas are still pulling the strings. There were a few who said the Obamas, and I think that's still true to some degree, but I don't think we recognize under the surface amongst the real adept politicos on that side of the aisle, I think we underestimate how much the Obamas have kind of outstayed their welcome. There was some, during the last election, I for whatever reason, X was feeding this to me every now and again. Just commentary from left-wing politicos I'd never heard of, operatives that most people have never heard of before. And there were a few who were very critical of Barack Obama, basically blamed the Obama time in office, blamed him for the conundrum they found themselves in last fall. Because there is no kind of bench of up-and-coming leadership in the Democrat Party. And this individual explained that it was because of Barack Obama's ego, narcissism, he would not allow anybody to even come close to outshining him. Veni Vidi Velcro says the media is in charge. Jay Breezy says, I think it's Bernie pushing and backing AOC. Harold says, Jeff. Don't know who that is. Connor says, still Obama. Bo, I don't have a name, but it's kind of the point. Some hidden deep state figure, CIA or rich globalist. David says Obama. Priva says CNN, MSNBC, CBS. Brian Time says the hive mind has no leader. No earthly leader. I'll kind of get to that in a little bit. But it is definitely a hive mind right now. Craig says they're still trying to fundamentally transform America, Obama's strategy. Andrew says Schumer has passed his time. They are positioning themselves now, and no clear leader has emerged yet. Lynn says Obama. Brenna says Soros. Joel says deep state. So I think we're seeing a theme here. If it's not going to be Satan, if it's going to be practical forces here right now, we all agree that to some degree, Moloch is really who's driving the Democrat Party. It's a demonic force. But in terms of their practical leadership, it is either AOC, okay, that's who finished first in the voting. It's either that, Soros, Obama, the deep state, or the media in that order, because those are the four other options that we heard come up the most. Basically, what we're seeing here is that this is the same Democrat Party it's been for the last 20 years, but absolutely the last 10 years. Just absolutely bat crap crazy, driven by demons. But what we're seeing now is different in that it's not constrained by any strong leadership at the top. It's really not. There's no pragmatism here. It's just unabashed, 200 proof Straight, no chaser, evil, but with no strategy either. It's fascinating to watch, and we will watch it. Back at it again tomorrow.
This has been the AM Update Week in Review. The AM Update will be back on Monday and every weekday at 4 a.m. Eastern Time.